bad for the plants, and that is absolutely true. But at the same time, in terms of the actual sort of risk and cost for South Africa, it's much, much lower than developing a whole new industry. So South Africa may be one of those special cases where you say, okay, well, some of that peaking energy that we need to bring in could possibly be provided by very low usage of the coal fleet, and that's what we've seen in some of these models. And it is technically feasible. It's been demonstrated. You can do, with a minor amount of modification of the plants, that you can provide some of this, and then it would be sort of 1 to 2% of the total availability in the sort of the later years, just for that seasonal load. But that doesn't really address the issue that we're talking about, because even that means a rapid drawdown in the coal industry, right? Which is what we're talking about. The challenge is really in the beneficiation, the supply chain, where all of these folks who are employed there, how do they beneficiate, sort of receive sort of jobs? How do we deal with them? And there is this question about where is, for South Africa, the biggest risk in terms of the employment, because decarbonizing, we know we have 93,000 jobs in the coal industry. Those jobs are very much at risk. But at the same time, failing to decarbonize our whole economy is a big issue, and it risks, this diagram here in the top left is all of the jurisdictions that currently have carbon prices. A lot of when countries put in carbon prices, they are likely to do as the EU has proposed for 2026, to put in border carbon adjustments. And that means that when we're exporting carbon heavy products, which is what we have, to those economies, we have to pay their carbon price effectively for access, regardless of our pricing here. And so failure to decarbonize actually limits our potential to do exports. A lot of our industries therefore are impacted. And a lot of the argument today has been specifically about the electricity sector, which is a huge portion of our emissions as a whole and a huge consumer of coal, but is not by any means the sort of sum total of it. The cement industry has to use large amounts for the production of cement, and the steel industry, both of those which are developmentally critical, both use large amounts of coal. And so when we're talking about the decarbonization, the shift away from coal, we also need to think about what does that mean for those, and we need to be thinking about the planning for those, the transition in those sectors as well. But we also need to bear in mind that there is a huge opportunity in doing that shift sooner rather than later. If we can decarbonize our steel industry through rapidly bringing in direct reduction from green hydrogen, so huge scaling of our renewables, then that means that we actually are leading. We can make sure we have that market access, but we're leading the sort of global trend in this way, and we have preferential access of our products to very large markets. And so we're very much focusing in general on in the transition process on, how do we protect what we have, but we also need to be very clear that doing it too slowly means that we fail to capitalize on the opportunities that are there in this transition. This is just a quick look at the recent coal prices, and you see this massive spike recently, and this is because of the sort of the energy crisis in Europe because of the war in Ukraine and because of their lack of access now to Russian gas. And so we're seeing a lot of countries bringing their coal plants out of mothballing, and effectively for the winter they're hoping to get the coal supplies. And so South Africa has been exporting a large amount of our coal to them. But this is not a long-term trajectory. This is very much a short-term blip. And what we're seeing is many of those countries, so Germany has brought forward their 100% renewable energy goal to 2035. They're planning on doing it entirely. And so really what we're seeing is for a lot of countries, the global energy crunch that's just happened is pushing the renewable energy transition forward. It's happening faster. And this has big implications for South Africa. Right now, is a great time to be a coal company, because you have these windfall profits, and we're really raking it in. But in the sort of what it means is then the transition away from coal globally is happening much more rapidly, and we mustn't forget that when we're talking about move away from coal in our energy industry, a lot of the coal that goes into Eskom is through long-term contracts that's negotiated, but for the coal mines, there's a strong subsidization effectively of that by selling the higher quality coal and if that starts shutting down, which we're likely to see in the near term, we're going to bleed more jobs. And we mustn't forget. So I guess the point is that when we're thinking about this energy transition and the pace, we have to realize that we don't have the luxury of making that choice entirely independent of the world. We are also part of this whole global trajectory, and to some extent our hand is being pushed here. And perhaps, in light of that, we need to be thinking, okay, regardless of our planning for the trajectory, we need to be targeting those windfall profits at the transition right now. This is where it's happening. It's we've got this income coming in, but we need to be thinking about a lot of energy storage in our mining areas, green hydrogen, using our acid mine drainage, right? So it's water we can't use for anything else, and tapping into the PV in our sort of coal areas, and also thinking about the restoration economy. And then just one last thing, which I think is very much sort of front of mind for much of civil society, is this question about the beneficiation at the transition right now. This is where it's happening. A rapid transition could happen very effectively. We're seeing this accelerated decarbonization happening. But the rapid transition could mean that we perpetuate or even accentuate the status quo, large centralization of areas, or even privatization of energy, not a lot of beneficiation in the jobs. We're not really seeing the consultative process happening adequately. And so we see the transition being largely unjust. On the flip side, a slower transition could make the case. We have, more equitable outcomes, a more social legitimacy, because we're doing this consultative process. We're able to roll out our plans, and so that you could say that this makes the case for civil society, that actually we would prefer it to be properly mapped out and incremental. But we would argue that we don't actually have that choice at the moment. The reality is we've got 6 of our coal plants closing before 2030, but we're likely going to see those plans for closure shifting closer as renewables come down in price, as storage comes down in price, as the international market for coal becomes reduced. And South Africa has a very poor history, as Bobby pointed out earlier, of planning for the mine closure and for the transition for communities dependent on those mines. So this means that I would make the case that the transition process is imminent, it's happening, and we have to try and plot this middle way, this just and effective, strongly participatory process, which the Commission has taken the first steps on. But we need to think about the transition as underway. This isn't something that we're talking about for 2035. And when we talk about the pace of coal closure, we can think about some sort of grandfathering and attenuation, but the reality is that the jobs and the beneficiation that are in the coal industry are moving away from us now. And we need to ensure this social justice while addressing the shift. It's not only in electricity, but in our economy as a whole. It's rapidly becoming not just a side issue or a hot topic, but it's becoming the central issue in South Africa's development trajectory. And I think this is how we need to think about it, and this is how we need to be planning going forward.
Thank you for that, James. I think you've made my job so much more easier, because you've kind of summed up a lot of what before this together. We have to have a collaborative ecosystem. I mean, that was said by Nix as well. We can't think about one sector on its own. We have to think about the whole thing. And perhaps there's an integrated view with some sectors moving faster than others, with recognition of what can be done where and by when. I think that's for me what's coming out quite strongly here. We do have a number of questions, and we're certainly not going to be able to answer all of them. We've got 10 minutes, and I'd like to still give some time for Dr. Oliver to sort of sum up and close us out. I'm going to allow for 5 minutes of few questions. I'm not going to go to the chat, and I'm going to ask those who have, who are here, some of the commissioners. Melissa, you had a few questions. Can I ask if you'd be willing to take the floor and maybe provide some of your perspectives? You've raised some questions as well, if you're willing to do that. And any of the other commissioners that are here. Melissa, would you be willing?
So this means
Melissa, you're on mute. Oh, she's in a public space. Okay, she can't actually come through. Bobby, we've heard from you. Is there anything more you would like to reflect on?
For now, no, Shamini, thank you very much. Just get us the presentations. I think they were useful. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Bobby. Are there any other commissioners on that I cannot see? Because I don't want to forget someone. I don't see anyone, but I really think it's important that we do. Nix, you've spoken already. Is there anything you'd like to add?
No, thanks. No, nothing to add.
Okay, thank you for that. I think, this has been a really great conversation. I think we've put forward a number of key issues. We haven't landed on solutions, and I don't think this is by any means the answers are going to be given here. I think this is a start of a very long dialogue. Some key things that stand out for me is, pace and timing of the transition. Which sectors? We only spoke about the power sector here. We heard from James. There are definitely other sectors that need to be brought to the debate. The petrochemical sector, CTL and its emissions, cement, we've got iron and steel. All of these are hard to abate sectors. What does this mean for the transition, and how do we look at coal as feedstock, coal as part of the electricity mix and energy mix for these different operations? What does the transition look like? And I think, as the PCC, these are key discussions that we need to take forward, especially when we start thinking about the updating of the IRP. We have got 8 minutes. I want to take then one more question from the chat, if the team would allow me. Nix, this is for you. According to the Statista, the 93,000 people employed by the SA coal mining industry earned approximately 31.4 million in 2021. To what extent can this remuneration threshold be used as a proxy to ring-fence the risk posed by the JET plan on coal mining jobs specifically? This was raised by John Mathwasa.
Sorry, can you just repeat the question?
Okay, so I'll read, sorry, 1 minute. Let me just pick it up again. Okay, according to Statista, the 93,000 people, I think it's Stats SA, the 93,000 people employed by SA's coal mining industry earned approximately 31.4 million in 2021. To what extent can this remuneration be used as a proxy to ring fence the risk?
No, thanks. I think it's time dependent, because if it's sudden, then it can be used as a proxy. But if it's gonna take the timelines that Eric and Jesse has put forward, then it's much lower, in the sense that natural attrition will take place, and there'll only be a limited amount of workforce that need to be attended to, and that would be the proxy that would be for the just energy transition. But if it's sudden, then that would be a proxy. But if it's a well-phased out program which allows for natural attrition but takes into account the agency of the transition, then it will be a much more slow, a smaller number. Thank you.
Thanks, Nix. And I think the important point is that we are trying to avoid the sudden premature closures where there's shocks to the economy. So I think that's important to bear in mind. That's exactly what the Just Transition Framework has put forward, in terms of making sure that we can do this so that just and equity, forms part of the underlying process. There's a few more questions, and Eric, this one is really related to the electricity sector in terms of what you guys are doing. What studies have been done relating to health, if any at all? And then also on rural areas and electrification. There's a few questions repeating on that. Maybe if you can come through.
Yeah, so in terms of the electrification, the microgrids we see as a great opportunity. When one looks at building and constructing distribution lines, and you do as a trade-off as cost against the microgrids, I think having the plants assembled at Komati and dispatching it, we have a pilot site. One could power between 25 and 30 homes for each of these microgrids. So we believe it's an opportunity. Equally, there's opportunities to line these microgrids on the national highways as charging ports for electric vehicles. But for rural specifically, that's one of the key objectives, is dispatching these microgrids where one could actually electrify between 25 and 30 homes. In fact, we've seen such positive outcomes for the ones that we've got on pilot. Those communities actually have taken their chicken fence nets and have actually, ensured that there's closure to ensure that this infrastructure is protected. So we've seen some very positive outcomes out of this pilot study.
So you've also taken into account all of these issues, the need for energy, to be distributed further than where we are right now. You've looked at air quality, water, waste, and decarbonization, as well as the cost issues. That's what I'm hearing from you. It was a multifaceted approach in terms of what you were trying to deal.
100%. And I think, when one looks at the distribution strategy, there's a whole team that's looking at the distribution of the future. And I mean, there's a whole chapter on this specific microgrid.
Okay, thanks, Eric. I want to now hand over to Dr. Olva. Dr. Olva, you were meant to come in at the beginning, so apologies, but I'm going to give you time now.
You cut me unfairly.
Apologies, but you have the floor to close us out on this very important discussion. But I think it's critically important we have a further one. I think it was not long enough, but I'm sure we're going to do more of that. But over to you, Dr. Olva.
No, thank you, Shamini, and thank you for so ably chairing this session. It was incredibly productive. And, I think you can really get a sense of the complexity of the issues that we have to consider, not just for today's topic, which is about the pace of the coal transition, but more broadly, as we look at this energy transition and what our plan needs to be, you can see that we've got to balance concerns around people's health, people's livelihoods, the impact on jobs, the impact on our economy and our trading system and the various economic sectors. We've got to talk about energy security. We've got to talk about energy poverty. And of course, the thing that's driving all of this is this imperative to decarbonize, and to decarbonize at a pace that doesn't liquidate our economy and shut down industrial sectors before we've been able to build out new green sectors. We've got some very strategic decisions in front of us. If we move too fast, we destroy large parts of the economy and jobs. If we move too slowly, we're going to be stuck with this outdated, inefficient economy that gets shut out of the global trading system, and which is equally disadvantageous. I think the point's been well made. We can't talk about decommissioning into a vacuum. We can't decommission power without the new power, the renewables that has to be put on the grid. And I think the one thing that everyone is clearly aligned on, the pace and scale of the renewables rollout has to be massively increased. 7 to 8 gigawatts per annum is what the modeling shows us is required. That's equivalent to all of the REI4P rounds to date. And that's got to go hand in hand with a massive amount of storage and the ability to balance the peaking power, whatever the technology source is that it comes from. So you can see this dialogue, on the pace of coal closure is in a sense a fitting culmination of the series of dialogues that we started in July. So you'll recall in July we set out to discuss how we balance the electricity grid and what are these concepts, is base load an outdated concept? What are modern ways of balancing a renewable dominant grid? Then we looked at technological change and what its implications are for electricity system reliability. We then drilled into the investment required and how we're going to finance it. We spoke about industry structure, this move towards a more decentralized, open, competitive energy system that's underway and how it's regulated and governed. The second last one was on jobs and the just transition. So we looked long and hard at what the different scenarios mean in terms of job creation in economic sectors. And now today we were discussing the pace of coal closure and the different scenarios for that. So I know it's not everything. There's some very important issues that we haven't completely drilled into. I mean, I was reminded by Richard Worthington in the chat that the Energy Governance South Africa Network has led a really interesting process to put this paper together on energy poverty and free basic services. And we've got to find time, in the further process to hear that and other, key inputs into this exercise. So what we're going to be doing next, I just want to give you a little bit of a sense of the next steps and the timeframes. We are in the process of writing up all these dialogues. They, incredibly rich amount of material from a wide range of people, experts globally and locally. So we're going to be producing a set of, 6 think pieces that have come out of these dialogues, and we're going to be circulating that and putting it on the website. We are doing a little bit of a sort of in-depth planning session with our commissioners. It's our net zero working group. So that's going to be taking place later in November. And we then want to go into a set of detailed engagements with stakeholders. I mean, I know some of you have said, look, this webinar format is not consultation. You're getting a whole lot of expert views, but this is not in-depth stakeholder engagement, and we acknowledge that. So we're setting up probably, this is towards the end of this year, but more probably early in the new year, a set of in-depth discussions with a whole range of constituencies, organized labor, civil society organizations, community groups, young people, local government, the religious sector, the business sector, and of course, the various government entities that are integral to this. And we're wanting to build that up towards a multi-stakeholder engagement. Sometime in the first quarter of next year. And we'll be putting out a draft energy transition plan. The intention is to, once we've chewed that over in a stakeholder process, to put it into the commission and let the commission then make proposals, make recommendations to the president and to cabinet that get factored into this updated IRP process. We're obviously going to go a little bit beyond the energy mix. I mean, we want to look at a whole range of things and guidance, including how we govern and plan going forward. I mean, in some ways, this very static rolling 5-year IRP process is a little bit inflexible for the kinds of fast-moving, rapidly technological change that's happening in the energy sector. So we may need a different kind of planning instrument, and we want to make recommendations about that as well. So on that note, Chair, I just want to thank everyone for an incredibly rich set of inputs. It's really been a fascinating journey with all of you. And we look forward to the next phase in this process of engagement. Thank you.
Thank you, Executive Director. Thank you for that, and it gives some clarity as to what we're going to do going forward, because certainly this conversation is just starting. And I think the thing that I take away is that the different key stakeholders are deeply thinking about this. And there are a lot of commonalities, but there's also some divergent views where we need to find the middle ground option. And I think you've said it well. I think there's some hot topics that we need to take forward. I do want to tell everyone, thank you for participating. Thank you for all your questions. Thank you to the panelists for some great insights and perspectives. We will endeavor to answer all of the questions that have been put forward, or even by email or even on the chat still. And we will definitely be taking forward this conversation next year. So thank you for your time, and I'd like to close the session. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, colleagues.
Thanks, bye.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Shamini.
everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.